Hi, everyone. I'll give folks a minute or so to join, and then we'll get started. Hey, let's get started. So welcome to today's Harvard Data Science Initiative Industry Seminar. I'm Jen Chow. I'm Director of External Engagement, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Amy Smith from Intuit. Amy Smith is a staff technical program manager who leverages deep expertise in data science, visualization, and policy research to lead responsible AI programs at Intuit. She works at the intersection of technology and strategy to orchestrate complex technical programs that drive forward initiatives across Intuit's many businesses. So in addition to Intuit, her career has spanned transportation planning and water resource management, including stints at Uber and the California Department of Water Resources, among others. She received her BA and MA in geography and regional studies from the University of Miami. Before I hand over to Amy, I'd like to remind our audience that there will be time after her presentation for questions. Audience members should use the Q&A function to send in their questions at any point during the presentation. So please don't be shy. All questions are good questions. Thanks and welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen with you. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy, as Jen mentioned. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm currently a staff technical program manager for Responsible AI. I work at Intuit, and I'm going to share my professional journey with you. It's what I like to call my data nerd origin story, from mapping wetlands to mapping ethical AI frameworks. And it's been quite the ride over the last 15 plus years with more plot twists than your average Netflix series. So I will go to the next slide. So who am I? This little karate kid on the screen is me. Before I was breaking down complex AI ethics problems, I was breaking boards at the local dojo. No, just kidding. I wasn't really breaking boards, but I couldn't resist. My mom signed me up for karate, as well as gymnastics, Girl Scouts, dance, piano, to channel my quote unquote excessive energy. Her diplomatic words for "this child never stops moving." Little did she know that she was training a future data ninja. That discipline of practice has followed me throughout my career, whether I'm learning Python, SQL, or how to diplomatically tell executives that their AI idea might be accidentally evil. Here's the career roller coaster that I've been riding. Notice that my graduation lines up perfectly with the Great Recession. Perfect timing, right? I had a fancy geography master's degree and was competing with pretty much everyone for anything. My first professional title was census enumerator, which sounds more impressive than person knocks on doors asking if you live here. I then leveled up to GIS analyst, which in plain English means map maker who doesn't get benefits. And eventually I landed at Farron Piers as a geospatial data and technology specialist, which is a title that they let me make up because I wouldn't fit into a single role. By 2015, I had transformed into a data scientist for policy research at Uber, where I stayed until COVID caused massive layoffs in 2020. After some pandemic soul searching and freelancing, I joined Intuit in 2021, where I've evolved from data analyst to my current responsible AI role. And the timeline also shows a few world events that shaped my career, recessions, pandemics, and the release of ChatGPT, which turned my responsible AI work from important but theoretical to, oh my goodness, this is happening right now. A little bit about why I'm here. Why did I transition from pure data scientist to responsible AI? Well, after years answering the question, can we build this? I became increasingly obsessed with the question, should we build this? And I realized that all the technical skills in the world don't matter if we're using them to create harmful systems. And so this photo shows me networking at the Partnership on AI Policy Forum in New York last year, or as I like to call it, awkwardly balancing a coffee cup while trying to sound intelligent. Um, but real talk, these connections have been vital. Community is how I've learned, grown, and found opportunities through every single career twist. So let's go on a journey. For the next 40 minutes or so, I guess, I'll take you on my career journey. We'll cover the recession years, my transportation planning phase, the wild ride at Uber, including getting laid off during a global pandemic. Spoiler alert, not fun. My transition to Intuit and my newest adventure, a personal project called Soft Soil, where I get to combine data geekery with wellness topics. This quote perfectly captures my mindset during those early uncertain days, especially when there's no clear path forward. You really have to see possibilities where others might see dead ends. Our journey starts with the Great Recession. This graph always makes me laugh nervously. See that little graduation arrow? That's me finishing grad school right as the economy drove off a cliff. Job hunting in 2009 was like playing a game of musical chairs where someone removed 50 chairs at once. Ramen was dinner and my financial strategy during this time. In grad school, I researched using space-based radar to detect water levels in the Everglades. Um, Very nerdy, but also very exciting. This is where I learned to code, thanks in large part to a friendly postdoc who patiently explained MATLAB to me. This slide explains how synthetic aperture radar works if you're not familiar with it. Um, it's an active remote sensing method, and in particular, it can detect water by measuring backscatter patterns. And so smooth surfaces are really easy to detect with SAR since they reflect the transmitted signal. And so SAR is an approach to monitoring inundation coverage that complements the traditional monitoring techniques like measurement stations, which are really only able to collect data at discrete points. Why did this research matter? Um, I feel like the why is really, really important for me in any role that I've had throughout my career. I need to understand why the work that I'm doing is important. And so when it comes to the Everglades, it's not just a cool swamp that you can go to and take an airboat around. It also provides drinking water for 8 million Floridians. It protects communities from hurricanes, and it supports $1 billion fishing industry. And this is where I first saw the connection between data and real world impact. And this is a theme that would define my entire career. Nature is our chapel. These words from Bjork remind me of the reverence I felt working in environmental science. There's something truly humbling about using technology to understand our natural systems. My first quote unquote real job was a census enumerator for the 2010 decennial census. I was basically paid to drive out to farms and senior living facilities to collect census data. My geography degree was being leveraged in ways that I had never really expected it would. My specific census assignment was counting people in group quarters. And this taught me something really important about data. Behind every point is a person with a story. I met the farmers and I met the elderly who needed to be included in the census. And how we collect data determines whose stories get told. I also participated in the homeless census, which happens every decennial census, going out with a clipboard and a headlamp. This particular census is done in the middle of the night because it reduces the likelihood of double counting. People are staying where they stay for the night. I believe that everyone should consider being a census enumerator at some point. It teaches you what goes into creating the data sets we, as data scientists, download with a simple click. Plus, you get access to places and conversations that you never would otherwise. My census supervisor used to say, we're not just counting people, we're making people count, which is cheesy, yes. True, also yes. You matter unless you multiply yourself by the speed of light squared, then you energy. This nerdy physics joke makes me laugh, but it also reminds me of something really important, which is that people matter not just as data points, but as individuals with dignity. After the census, I landed a contract position with the California Department of Water Resources. And what I was doing there was analyzing underwater maps of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. This job title, GIS analyst contract, was my first professional step up from census enumerator, though the contract part still meant no benefits. We were still basically in a recession, and I wasn't able to, they weren't able to hire me full time. I also had furlough Fridays. So every Friday, we didn't go to work to save costs. And so this is where I learned Python, which I think has become a really important part of how I work. But I learned it out of sheer necessity. I had to process thousands of sonar readings, and doing it manually just would have taken months, and I don't think the computer would have been able to handle it. Multi-beam echo sounders. Okay, so this is super interesting. I didn't know about this in technology until I worked at DWR. They send acoustic waves that bounce off the seafloor, or in this case, I worked in the river system, so the river floor, creating detailed underwater maps. And I learned to calibrate the GPS linked to the sonar. So it would be kind of like going out on the boat, hooking up the sonar, which looked under the water, hooking up the GPS, which got the location information. And then I also learned how to drive a boat. So this is actually a picture of me driving a boat in the Delta. Um, all of these things really pushed me out of my comfort zone and challenged me to focus and notice and take action in ways that have really stuck with me. And I'm so grateful for that valuable experience that I had there. This mapping work was important because the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is a crucial migration channel for salmon. The data that's collected helps understand how boat traffic and other factors affect the underwater environment that salmon need to travel through. So for instance, if there's regular boat traffic going through a certain area, it could actually impact the underlying bathymetry, which could impact then the salmon's migration patterns. And one fun fact is that one of the interventions for steering salmon when they veer off the migration path is called a fish disco. And it's a device that sits under the water, and it uses light and sound to redirect the fish. And so part of my job of mapping the bathymetry was determining, okay, where do we need to install things, these interventions such as the fish disco. Next came my transportation planning years at Fair and Piers from 2011 to 2015. This is where I accidentally became an honorary urban planner while officially being a GIS specialist. The world reveals itself to those who travel on foot. Werner Herzog's words capture why transportation planning matters, even though I don't think he meant it that way. But how we move through spaces shapes our entire experience of the world. And so I think of this quote often when I think about my planning days. At Fair and Piers, I started making basic maps, but gradually took on more complex analysis and tool development. I was essentially a graphics person when I came in, which is a graphic designer who knows how to make maps. But really, I think of this as my stealth urban planning degree because I constantly pestered the actual planners and engineers with my questions. My colleagues used to joke that when I would approach, they would know like ahead of time when I was approaching their desks because they could hear me sort of saying, "But why do we design things this way? Or why are the roads this way?" From halfway across the office. And I was that annoying person who just kept asking why about established practices. And it turns out that this is a annoying, maybe yes, but also just a really valuable skill in any field. And here's my why for transportation. I connected very deeply with this work because it really directly impacts so many things: sustainability, accessibility, safety. It's not just about traffic jams. It's about whether someone can get to a doctor's appointment or a job interview. And the thousands, tens of thousands of traffic fatalities last year aren't just statistics, they are preventable tragedies. And so I'm grateful that the work I did at Fair and Piers, it spanned safety, it spanned sustainability, accessibility, and really made me feel like I was having a direct impact on people's lives. I think transportation planning really needs data scientists for a few reasons. Um, the first is that like traditional transportation planning still relies on very clunky legacy software and manual processes. And I think a lot of this is because it's just, the same processes often need to be done year over year for planning and forecasting. And so they're really embedded in these legacy systems. Um, and during my time at Fair and Piers, I automated processes that previously would take weeks of manual work into a 5-minute Python script. And my manager was, I think, simultaneously thrilled and also maybe a little terrified. Um, the other thing I'd mention is causal inference. And so if you go to any transportation planning conference, you will see paper upon paper about causal inference and how it's used to determine impacts of things like congestion pricing or other interventions. But in the day-to-day practice, it's not really leveraged in super practical ways, at least not in my experience. And I think there's just a ton of opportunity there. Um, and then the last reason here is data viz. I am a big data nerd. I love data visualizations, and transportation is just like a gold mine of data when it comes to coming up with interesting visualizations. And it's so important as a communications tool and also as a creative person and an artist. It really gave me a creative outlet that I found I needed in an environment that could sometimes be a little bit dry, to be honest. And so that's a really fun aspect of the work. So I have here some different modes: bikes, trains, automobiles. I worked on all of them, and then Uber. While I was at Fair and Piers, Uber was becoming a thing. And as transportation planners, we were all kind of wondering, what is this new thing going to do to the way people get around? How is it going to affect travel behavior? How's it going to affect the environment? And as we were all thinking about this, I got a call from a headhunter at Uber. And that is a nice segue into this next phase. Okay, so this is a quote from my manager at the time, Jonathan Hall, who is also Uber's chief economist. And it was during my first year of working at Uber, he said this, if Uber isn't a fever dream, I don't know what is. And that really perfectly captures what it felt like working there at times. It was exciting, disorienting, sometimes surreal. And it was also the kind of thing where my mom could never really explain to her friends what I did at Uber. Um, it was kind of like she works for Uber, but no, she doesn't drive. And that was kind of confusing to her friends. So eventually she settled on telling people that I help Uber make better maps, which was close enough. This slide shows headlines from when I joined Uber. Um, a mix of fascination and controversy in 2015 sort of defined the company. Working there meant navigating complex questions about technology, policy, and social impact, literally on a daily basis. And sometimes with the regulatory conversations that were happening, there's almost a sense of like existential threat because we didn't know what was going to happen and how it would impact the business. But one of the fun things that many people don't know is that there was, and I'm pretty sure still is, a team of transportation nerds within Uber studying how ride sharing is changing urban mobility. And so this was kind of the sweet spot for me because it was already what I was interested in, already what I was thinking about. And here I had the chance to actually analyze the data and do the research. Um, this is also where I truly became a SQL wizard out of necessity when faced with data from millions of trips. And I think learning SQL and learning Python and learning MATLAB on the job, all these experiences gave me direct applications of the technology and really made it stick. So I'm always grateful for the skills that sort of built up in each of these steps where I was sort of forced to learn something in order to make it work. And on that team, it was a policy research team. So we focused on transportation as well as other policy relevant topics. But we were, very passionate about the work we were doing. We had debates. We were definitely kind of like the weird urbanist corner of the company. I think of this as one of our team's biggest achievements, and that is launching this tool called Uber Movement. And it was a platform that used anonymized data about travel times across cities. Getting the approval for this involved convincing executive, lawyers, engineers, public policy teams, basically a marathon of stakeholder management that taught me how to speak a lot of different professional languages. And I remember having to explain the same project to engineers, to lawyers, and to executives, to city planners externally, all in the course of a week. And by the end, it was kind of confusing. What language am I speaking? Who am I talking to? But it was really great experience and I think a really cool project that had a lot of benefits to it. The question, is ride sharing good for cities? Has no simple answer. There are, of course, complex economic, environmental, health, labor dimensions to consider, but it was this multifaceted complexity that made the work intellectually fascinating, despite the company's public challenges. There was so much to dig into. And so you can see a photo here of me and my team out after work. It was just a very memorable time. Another fun fact, it also took me to Southeast Asia. I worked for a year from Singapore in the Uber Asia Pacific offices. And as part of that work, traveled to various offices around the region, the Philippines, Indonesia, India. And that was also a very like once in a lifetime thing to be on the ground in that environment and learn to understand the regulatory challenges there as well. Then came the email that no one wants to receive. We regret to inform you. On May 17th, 2020, after 5 years at Uber, I was laid off along with thousands of colleagues as COVID really decimated the ride-sharing business for a while there. This chart shows the unemployment spike, and I became part of that statistic. This is the LinkedIn post I wrote after being laid off. I'll admit, I cried when I got that email. 5 years of work just felt like I was gone in a split second. But I decided to be vulnerable and public about the experience, which unexpectedly opened new doors. This post in particular went semi-viral in a lot of different circles, and I received outreach from companies and individuals I never would have connected with otherwise. People who I hadn't talked to in years reached out to me and wanted to help. And so this was just kind of a lesson in making lemonade from career lemons. Grief turns out to be a place none of us know until we reach it. I feel like Joan Didion captured the emotional reality of loss really well here in this quote. We don't talk enough about the grief that comes with transitions, especially the unexpected ones. But rather than spiraling, I channeled my energy into freelance work and writing. The image here shows the farmers market in San Francisco near where I live during California's wildfires, which you might remember if you live in California, in Northern California in particular. The sky turned this burnt orange color and it felt very apocalyptic. But what I did was I went and I interviewed the farmers and I asked them how they've been impacted by COVID and impacted by the wildfires. And then I wrote about how they were adapting to these crises. And that helped me connect with the community and with the farmers who I buy produce from every week. And I pitched this to the Bold Italic, which is a local publication in the Bay Area, and they published it. And so it just made me feel like even though, given everything, being unemployed, I'm still able to make an impact in my own community. In 2021, I joined Intuit, and this was just before the Gen AI explosion into the mainstream with tools like ChatGPT. So talk about timing. I went from a person who cares about responsible AI in theory to a person frantically helping a major company navigate the AI revolution. And this happened pretty much overnight. This is a quote from a writer I love, Lydia Yuknovich. She says, "You will see you have an underlying tone and plot to your life underneath the one you've been told." And looking back, my seemingly random career path makes perfect sense for someone working in responsible AI, which is the space I'm in now. Environmental monitoring, transportation equity, and now AI ethics, they're all about using technology to understand and improve complex systems that affect human well-being. So it's like my career had a plan, even though I felt like I didn't. At Intuit, I had initially started working on data analytics for TurboTax, but I gradually took on more responsible AI initiatives even before I was officially a TPM for responsible AI. And I was finding the diverse experiences throughout my career from field work and policy research really prepared me for the multidisciplinary nature of responsible AI. Yeah, so who would have thought that counting people for the census would give me insights relevant to AI bias? Life is just weird like that. A major focus of my work involves documenting standards for AI systems. Proper documentation is super important. It helps downstream users understand what they're working with and helps them build safe, helpful experiences for customers. One fundamental question that we ask in responsible AI is what data was used to train the model? And finding answers to this question can feel elusive, but also it's critical for trust in a system that we use in customer-facing products. Another key question is what evaluations were performed? My team partners with researchers and data scientists on evaluation frameworks that go beyond accuracy metrics into understanding potential harms, understanding things like fairness. And in order to be efficient and complete with the work that we do, we need to know what evaluations have already been conducted, and that will guide us in what testing we need to do for a new model. And so that really speaks to the importance of documentation standards for major model providers. It's funny because I remember when I got into this space, I felt immediately at home because it was a space where you have to get things right. And I was always kind of the stickler for let's get it right. And here I am now in a space where that really matters and everyone recognizes it, which is wonderful. Explainability is another area that's super important with responsible AI. How does this AI model arrive at its decisions? Model explainability is really critical for trust and responsible use. Another big one is data handling. How is data sent to the model? How is it used? How is it retained? These policies directly impact privacy and security. I sometimes think of responsible AI as digital environmentalism, if you will. We're really trying to create a sustainable, non-harmful technology ecosystem here. And data handling is a super important component of that. So at Intuit, we've developed a comprehensive framework for onboarding large language models safely. This includes evaluation protocols, guardrails, and documentation requirements like what I just shared with you. And this is actually one of my favorite programs in my portfolio. And I think that's because it requires collaboration across experts in legal, privacy, security, AI. And it also requires ongoing revision in response to the rapid pace of change. And so, as you might have gleaned, I'm somewhat of a generalist. So this sort of holistic look at something is really a space where I thrive and I feel like I can give back. So connecting the dots, um, looking back at my career timeline now, my path makes much more sense than it did while I was living it. Each seemingly unrelated experience contributed really valuable perspectives to my current work in responsible AI. And I love this quote, when we're able to produce a compassionate thought, this thought begins to heal us, heal the other, and heal the world. Technology, when it's built with compassion, has healing potential. This is the core philosophy behind my approach to responsible AI, but also just how I move through life. I believe we need both technical rigor and ethical compassion if we want to create AI systems that genuinely benefit humanity. And I'll share a little bit about my newest adventure. This is a side adventure, a personal project where I'm exploring the intersection of data, technology, and well-being. The name comes from the idea that we need fertile ground for healthy growth. whether we're talking about plants, people, or technology. Some of the recent topics that I've written about include how gut-focused hypnotherapy through an app helped my insomnia, the emotional aspects of data work, and observations from a recent health equity summit that I went to, where I met innovators who are doing really amazing things with technology in the healthcare space. And I feel like this is my space to integrate my professional expertise with my personal exploration, and also to write without a corporate review process, which is really nice. And so you can see here a link or the URL for the blog if you want to check it out. Um, and I would love any feedback on that. This has been a really fun and rewarding so far personal project. And I think now we've reached the Q&A. I would love to hear from you, all journeys and perspectives, and don't be shy.
Thank you so much, Amy. Loved hearing about your journey, and it's incredible how you never really think about what your path is. Paths, in my opinion, are only discernible in hindsight. And so I think your journey is just such a wonderful example of this. So thank you. And thank you for all your wisdom. Um, you and I met through a conversation that HDSI and the Harvard Data Science Review hosted on agentic AI and sort of, what's coming down the line. And we actually hosted a speaker last month from Duo Security on thinking about cybersecurity, and especially in the framework of his training as a socio-technical systems expert. But I think what's different about what you're sharing, what you've shared, is really the sort of very practical side of it. How are these things happening in practice? How do we um, pull these standards along with us and make sure we're crafting them to meet the moment, right? And so my question for you, well, we're waiting for others to maybe chime in, but my question for you is, how do you think about, the introduction of agents? I think you have a pretty robust framework uh, for LLM deployment. Um, agents are sort of that next level up, and thinking about autonomous decision making. So are your frameworks robust enough to handle that? Are you thinking about how do you build new frameworks? What are the pain points that you're thinking of actively right now?
Yeah. Well, I think the first big pain point is that everyone has a different definition of agent and agentic AI. So for some, it's as simple as automating workflows and streaming workflows together. Others think of it as a AI system, an LLM, or other type of AI technology that's acting autonomously on behalf of a human. And some think of it more as like computer vision, like something is actually controlling your computer. And that's one of the biggest challenges, because how we develop processes in that practical component um, has to be more specific to what we think the risks are, not specific to how someone might call their use case agentic. Um, and so I think that's kind of like the biggest challenge, not the biggest challenge, but one of the first challenges that I've noticed. And then the other is, like you said, how do you evaluate and monitor, and does it need to be different? I think a lot of it will depend on, first, how you're defining agentic. And then second, if the technology is something brand new that we haven't really dealt with before. And so computer vision is pretty new for Intuit. And so that's something where we are doing a lot of research and trying to understand how would we evaluate this? What are the potential harms, potential risks, and what are the controls that we would need to put in place? And that feeds into things like what processes do we need to put in place, and what infrastructure do we need to build to ensure that we're doing things responsibly?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that there's so much tension between this idea of responsibility versus innovation, right? I think that everyone is really scared that, on one hand, right, you have, I think it's not overstatement to say, many of us on the academic side are sort of saying, "Whoa, you're going to deploy these things in the world, and we just don't know enough about them yet." And a lot of folks on the tech and the innovation side are sort of saying, "Well, no, 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 you're just going to slow down development. Like we're way out ahead of you right now." And so I think it's interesting. And if I may, I think that there's an interesting place for companies like Intuit who have long delivered a product to customers and consumers and clients, thinking about how they're redesigning AI in the framework of what they believe is safe for their consumers, right? How I so we are entering a period. I don't know what's going to happen, but we are entering a period where regulation, federal regulation as a safety mechanism is sort of probably not going to happen in a huge, sweeping push at this point. Um, so, what's your sense of the atmosphere out there, the environment out there for companies like yours, in terms of having roles like yours think very carefully about responsibility, not at the expense of innovation, but as part of the innovation spectrum? Like, is this unique to Intuit, or do you think that this is something that is happening all across different industries and different sectors?
It's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And so um, one of the groups that I work with is Partnership on AI.
Mhm.
Intuit is a member. It includes members from industry, from academia, from like the public sector. And what's interesting is we just recently had a meetup, a sort of mini conference on um, enterprise AI. And I presented my work around documentation and LLMs. There were folks from other big companies, peers, as well as banks and more in like the financial sector. And as we were all presenting, we realized that we're all running into the same challenges and all coming up with like very similar solutions, but with these slight differences. And it was a really great sort of knowledge sharing, but also really great for like feeling not alone. We're not the only ones who are running into these challenges, and trying to balance that need to move fast as a company, and still like be responsible and prevent things from happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there is a really interesting movement of careful innovation happening from sectors which have historically been regulated. I think of financial, instruments. I think of financial institutions. I think of insurance, for example, as places where we, as HDSI, have seen a lot of really interesting conversations come up because of the history of data gathering. What are you doing with the data? How is that held? And how do we move forward to enable innovation? So I think that this is all fascinating. And in the absence of regulation, I find it heartening, I think, to know that these groups are sharing commonalities and sharing best
Sure.
practices together.
Yeah, and I might just add that we did talk about like the concerns around the regulatory environment and felt it was even more important to do the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think the companies that we work for feel that too. I mean, responsible AI, TPM, wasn't even a real role. I was the first person to take this role last year, and we're building out a team. And so I think that Intuit and others are seeing the importance of it and building teams and functions around it.
Um, I'm going to take you on a slightly different journey, which is that you mentioned causal inference as a really powerful tool, and we have some of the best work happening here at Harvard. It's a real strong point for just in terms of everything's great, but just in terms of, where there's really hot, active methodological development. And so, you asked a question, right? Is ride sharing good for cities? Um, you could think about how would you apply a causal inference methodology to unpack that question, right? And on the other hand, I can imagine that transparency can be complicated for a company, right? How do you how do you think about that? How do you, I guess your own personal feelings. I know that you can't speak for any particular company, but how do you navigate that space? Transparency versus, what could impact profits, revenue, and just your company's health.
Yeah. I feel like it's always a conversation where you need multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
And I can speak a little bit to my time at Uber because they have published research that uses causal inference. And the model there was super interesting during my time there, where we would partner with academics, share data, and uh, would not would basically say publish whatever you find, whether it's good or it's bad. Um, and I think that was done for a lot of reasons. One was really wanting to understand and get experts into Intuit to work with our data and to help us understand, but also to um, add some sort of like credibility and importance to what was happening on the ground. Um, and I'm trying to think, it's been a while now. So I know there was some research that was published on the gender wage gap using Uber data that did reflect a gap, and it was published and shared out. And I think that I really admire Uber for doing that and for having that approach to it. And it's something that I feel is really important. And so I feel like at Uber, we had a team of internal advocates advocating for that sort of thing. Um, and I almost feel like it has to come from like the teams within the company who really want to see something happen and really want to see that transparency and see the value of sort of giving back to the research community. That sort of makes that sort of thing happen. And I'm one of those advocates.
Well, we appreciate your advocacy. So I'm getting lots of questions actually in the Q&A about how do you how do you begin to incorporate these things that you've learned and incorporate these points of view that you have in terms of ethical AI into your work as a data scientist, right? So if let's say you're an early career data scientist, you've just graduated from, for example, the Harvard Business Analytics program or our Master's in Data Science program. How do you how do you tease out those opportunities to flex your ethical AI muscle? What's your best advice?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Well, as a data scientist, before I had transitioned into technical program management, um, I was really interested in how to detect bias in AI systems. And I think there are a lot of open source libraries and things that you can find now that sort of do this already, but at the time there wasn't much. And so I think a lot of it, even though I didn't end up, furthering that work within my role at Intuit, it helped me sort of show my interest and show that I was capable of doing work and thinking critically and using data. And I feel like that contributed to eventually working my way into the TPM role that I'm in now. So I think a lot of it is just finding the things that aren't being researched yet or aren't having solutions that are out there and easy to find. Um, Build a portfolio, put it up on GitHub, show that you're really interested in this space and thinking critically about it. I feel like that's really important.
Yeah. Um, I think uh, everything that you just said absolutely resonates. What is challenging, I think, is that you've identified that when we train data scientists, ethics can sometimes get tagged on to to sort of, oh, well, so here's the core skill set. And then we think about responsibility in this area. And I think that there's a piece of this that is, I guess what I'm reflecting on is the idea that someone who might have the skills and training as a data scientist would have to go out and further demonstrate their ability to think ethically and responsibly about data. And that's an interesting tension, I think,
Yeah.
over all of this.
I think I have the benefit of learning data science on the job within the context of specific areas like water resources, transportation. And so I always had the like contextual aspect of my work.
Mhm.
And that's really what drove me to learn data science. And so at the time I went to college, there was no such thing as like a data science degree. Um, I'm that old, but I think that's kind of where my perspective comes from. But I see what you're saying. Like, how can we expect people who have all these skills to be prepared for understanding ethics? And yeah, that's not something I had thought much about, maybe just because of the way that I learned.
Yeah, when I was in college, there was no such thing as a data science degree. There were a lot of computational biologists.
Yeah.
Um, so this is an interesting question, and maybe I'll expand a little bit. Delise DuPont says, it was surprising for me to hear about the important work your team was doing at Uber and to realize there weren't Black experts or practitioners on that team. As a responsible AI practitioner, how important do you think it is for Black practitioners and experts to be included in decision making? And I would expand that a little bit to ask, how do you think about democratizing data and decision making in the spaces that you work in? How do you, what are the levers that you can pull to increase representation across your data and your decision making?
That's such a good question. I'm actually going to use an example um, from my sort of personal explorations in the healthcare space, because I really love the work that's being done there, and I'm actually actively trying to figure out how to sort of apply their approach to what I'm doing. But one of the things that I found super interesting talking with startups in the healthcare space is a lot of them are developing these really innovative tools and devices and products, but they also have this added layer of how do we implement this in a way that it actually reaches the people that we want it to reach and that it actually is accessible by anyone. And so to do that, they have to figure out how to navigate insurance, how to navigate FDA, how to do like randomized control trials and clinical research. And it's like all these extra things that they do on top of just, innovating. And they do it because they want to reach people. And the best way to reach people through the healthcare system is through the broken infrastructure. And so that I feel like that's where a lot of real innovation lies, is how do you implement something in a way that it reaches people? It's not necessarily the technology, it's the navigation of the complex environment.
That's such a great reminder, I think, that deployment is, and not just, I don't mean just deploying a model. I mean, literally, how do you put it in people's hands is such an important piece of building a tool, a product, an idea. Is it going to reach the folks that you want it to reach? Is it reflective of the folks that you want it to reflect? I think is so important. I love your reminder that every data point is a person, because we also think that way here. Um, so one last question about sort of roles and business and your trajectory as a leader. When you took on your TPM role at Intuit, you said you're currently building out a team. What are the skill sets and what is sort of the hard training that you think someone should have to join a team like yours? And what are the other things that you look for in terms of, will they be the right fit for a role on your team?
Yeah. Um, I think especially in this rapidly changing environment of the AI space, um, it's really great if you are able to show that you can navigate ambiguous situations and ambiguous environments and put structure around it. That's something that I feel like is, um, it's kind of like an underhyped skill. Uh, but if you have it, you kind of have a superpower. Um, and then in terms of other things we might look for someone on the team, um, experience working in large organizations and working cross-functionally is another really, really big one. And then also, if you have a background in data science or engineering and you're familiar with the technology, that's such a good bonus. I would say it's not always required, but if you come in already sort of understanding what an LLM is and how it works at a high level even, and what the big model providers out there are, what the newest technology is, it'll just help you move faster and connect with developers and engineers um, that you're helping innovate.
I find this fascinating that that the technical or getting a sense of the technical landscape is a nice to have, but really what you identified are sort of, like core
Yeah.
attributes to how you work and what are those, people will call them soft skills, right? But I I hate that term because I feel like it demotes them. But how to work is such an important skill on top of what it is that you do.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, I could say like you should know smart sheets and you should know like other program management tools. Um, the tools skill set, I feel like you can learn
Yes.
how you approach things and how you can navigate really complicated situations, environments that can sometimes be political or just organizations having different perspectives on things, and you need to get people to align. Um, those are the kinds of skills that are really, really important that we look for.
That's terrific. So I like to end with the, very common question nowadays. What are you reading? If you have a book or article recommendation out there for our audience, let us know.
I am reading Cal Newport's book, Be So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Hmm.
And it's funny that I'm reading this as I'm going through my career journey because so much of it resonates about like career capital and getting so good at something that they can't let you go. And as data scientists, like I truly feel that my technical skills, my ability to code, to be efficient with the work I do, um, has opened up so many doors for me. And I feel like getting good at something is so important. And so reading this book, it's like reinforcing. So maybe that's why I like it. I'm like, oh, it's me, it's me. But
Love
also,
that.
I just really like Cal Newport's style of writing too.
Well, that's great. And we'll include the recommendation when we post this video.
Yeah.
All right. So, thank you, Amy. Before we close, I'd like to mention that our next industry seminar will be next week, surprise, on April 24th at 1:30 p.m. with Sakshi Jain from LinkedIn. Registration is available on our website, datascience.harvard.edu, and through our weekly newsletter. And so we hope to see everyone there. So with that, thanks once again, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, Amy, for all your insights. And have a nice afternoon, everyone. We hope to see you soon. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Amy.